I'm interested to do a bit of research in that. Like, especially now when I see on Instagram people posting their runs and like 16-minute 5K. You're like, I'm nowhere near that, and it just demoralizes. That promotion of like, this is what fitness is running ridiculous times, ridiculous high roxes, and it's like, I think people sometimes view that as like, that is fitness, whereas like, no, fitness is nowhere near that. That's extreme.
Mm.
I think people get into that way of like, that's what I need to be, and then because the initial agitation of that is so great, like it's tough. Like when you go back to training, I've experienced that. When you go back, it's not nice. Like people see the adverts of people lifting in the gym smiling. It doesn't look like that. Like it's tough, it's hard, but you get the benefit. But there's an initial discomfort associated with it for sure, and then people just don't then kick on because they feel this discomfort, and it's so far down the line. They see, I'm only running a 28-minute 5K, and these people are running 18. Like, how am I ever going to get there? And then they just disengage again.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to look at that, sort of how social media is portraying exercise and physical activity in a way that actually makes it really hard for people to engage, especially the population that you want. We're not interested in getting a guy from 20 to 18 minutes in a 5K because he's already fit. A girl, it's more about the person that's not doing anything. So that would be interesting to look at.
There's an interesting podcast, my kind of author crush, Steve Magnus. I think I've referenced him to you before, and he had that book.
He's great.
Yeah, he's got multiple podcasts, but the one that he does running, the one that he's had running for years, I'm sure they did one recently about what it's like for an athlete coming up the ranks these days with social media. And I think the really interesting one was, you would go, let's say our vintage, or even a little bit before that, you go to a running meet or whatever competition you go to, you compete, you do your best, and you've perhaps got about another 10, perhaps another 20 or 30 people to compare yourself. You're looking at this piece of paper on the wall of what everyone ranked. And that was your competition. You're in your kind of vicinity, and then you gradually go through the ranks and probably be exposed to other people. But now you finish anything and it's live. You've got 24/7 access to what every athlete in the world is doing. So unless you are, the prodigal son or daughter, you feel like you can't stop feeling like a failure. And that's, I hadn't even thought about that mind fuck that it must be for young athletes coming through.
Yeah, it just drives that I'm not good enough story, just like feeds it, like, because you're constantly seeing stuff that you're not meeting your expectation, other people's expectations, whatever, and it just makes growth really difficult because you're constantly coming up against these difficult thoughts and emotions that are basically telling you you're not growing. You're training hard, you're working, but when we have these sort of rigid performance metrics that we sort of assign to success, then it's really challenging at points. So it's an interesting, social media obviously feeds into that because, like you say, it's 24/7 access across the world that you can compare your performance to.
Yeah, well, that's a nice segue then. So what does it mean to be mentally tough?
I think it depends. Like a lot of the research initially was all around behavior. So I think it's really important to think, well, what is mental toughness? Well, what do mentally tough people do? And if they do something, then there must be some sort of behavior associated with that. So there must be a behavioral outcome that we associate mental toughness with. And as we sort of develop that understanding, it's important to then say, well, that depends on culture and society and values. So what I mean by that is what you class as mentally tough in an AFL academy could be very different to what mental toughness looks like in a high rocks gym. High rocks gym could be all about sacrificing this and, not doing this and training really hard and not sleeping and getting up really early. And that is mental toughness because that's what people assign and view. And within that culture, they're mentally tough because they do X, Y, and Z. Whereas in an AFL academy, it could be much more progressive around, like, is it making difficult choices? Especially in sport, there's always the classic example. Is it mentally tough in sport to say, to play injured or to actually go to someone and say, I'm now injured? Like, what's more mentally tough? Both have difficulties associated, like pain, for example, playing through pain. That perseverance piece is definitely mentally tough, like working through difficult things. But put yourself in the shoes of that athlete who then has to go to a physio on the brink of maybe a cup final or a big competition period and say, I'm injured. imagine putting yourself in those shoes, the anxiety, the worry, the concern, doubt, the fear, that's also really mentally tough. So how we assign that really depends on the culture that we try and create. Again, there'll be numerous examples from within high level professional sport. Like mental toughness could be like drinking on a Monday, training hard on a Tuesday. Like that could be mentally tough. Do you know that? Or is it mental toughness? Is that staying behind after training and watching half an hour video when you're tired and you don't want to, and no one else is there to watch? It's just you and you taking care of your own performance. Like, is that mentally tough? Because again, that's a challenging behavior. Maybe you want to get home, you're tired. There's other things you could be doing with your time. You don't particularly want to do this, but you know that it's going to improve your performance. So yeah, it's a challenging one. And certainly from the research, there's definitely a cultural and societal element to it, that it really depends on the culture that you're in.
So it sounds like there's not a firm defined term as yet, or it's an evolving term, which I feel like happens all the time in exercise science. I'm sure many other realms.
Yeah, it definitely is evolving. So it went from that sort of resilience part where it was like about setbacks, dealing with setbacks, but then from the research, we didn't really it doesn't account then for those pro-social behaviors. And what I mean is taking care of your sleep, taking care of your nutrition. Like that's mentally tough. But that's not dealing with a setback as such. So I guess the literature is a bit messy, but coping with stress, coping with difficulty, is probably a really broad definition that you could go with. And the difficulty with that is it brings in lots of different things: confidence, resilience, motivation. So it becomes this sort of collection of attributes, which just makes it messier. So like, I guess it's a really difficult term to define. We all have our own opinions. Certainly coaches will love giving you opinions on what mental toughness is in their sport and what mentally tough athletes do. And that's where certainly the research we took looked to focus on a concept of psychological flexibility, which had a bit more stability to it, and definitely has associations with mental toughness.
Okay, so you've actually almost spoiled my second question, which was going to be, what's the difference between grit and discipline and motivation and resilience? Because I feel like, and I've definitely got about 5 of them sitting behind me on my bookshelf there, every wannabe writer or ex-athlete who's had a difficult experience in their life brings out their biography, and it's somehow orientated towards about how gritty they were or how tough they were. Maybe gritty's back, so I understand that comes from a research background. But these words, firstly, they sell books and they get people to read them because people want to know what it's like. But it sounds like mental toughness is this umbrella term.
Absolutely, yeah. So like grit and the work that Angela Duckworth did was really around perseverance, like just getting through difficult periods. And that's great, but it very much sat with, like, grit was sat within the individual. And we understand mental toughness, as I've described, is a bit more about your environment as well. So grit was quite focused on the person and didn't really account for the sort of the society that they're in, or the influence of culture. And then resilience, like I mentioned, is all about these setbacks. But what about all these great things that you do when that could be described as mentally tough? And like, doing your stretching before training, that's meant no one wants to do it. No one enjoys doing it. But some people do it, some people don't. You wouldn't say it's a resilient behavior to to turn up 10 minutes early and stretch. But I would class it as mentally tough, because everything in your mind is, I don't need to do that. I'll be fine. Can't be bothered. And a lot of people then feed into that narrative or lean into it and don't complete the behavior. So I guess mental toughness is this big circle that encompasses a lot of different things. And within it sit grit, which is probably a smaller side part of the pie, and a slightly bigger part of the pie would be resilience. And then you've got mental toughness that encapsulates both. So yeah, it's quite an umbrella term for sure. Someone who spent a PhD looking into it, not something I engage with anymore. It's not, so that even the research is it got quite messy and has dried up a little bit, but it's not quite that buzz about it that it was maybe around the early 2000s, 2010, 2015, where everyone was labeling, throwing it out there. So yeah, it's not something that that I use as a term much, because I think it has a lot of negative connotations potentially as well. You'll see stories of in high level sport of abuse and things, and some people do hide behind, I'm trying to make you mentally tough, and it's really just it's abuse in some forms as well.
It really has joined together two lovely colloquial words that we like to use in sport. There's lots of these terms that aren't necessarily perfectly defined, like I think power, explosive, the words that get battered around in our industry quite a lot. And then people are trying to put some color to it at the end rather than perhaps the other way around. That's it's going.
It's 100%. It definitely fits in that bracket. It's a sexy term. It sounds great. Everybody, whatever it is, I want it because it sounds great. But we don't really know what it is. It's broad. It's big, and it's something that for me, I can sort of take it or leave it. There's other concepts up there that I would promote athletes and coaches to think about, and always be wary of how, because of that cultural influence, like when they are talking about mental toughness, I think a great question to ask, like myself or somebody, is, what do you mean by that? Like, what do you mean by mental toughness as a coach? Because I think if you're going to talk about it, you should really understand it well. And some coaches may have a view of it that might not be helpful.
Gotcha. And I think it's interesting you mentioned culture. There's obviously team culture, there's organization culture, but something I've been reading about lately is how storytelling in different societies, so big cultures, is different, and how Western society is very much centered on the individual being the hero, getting the whatever the prize at the end of it, whereas Eastern cultures are much more collective around that. Is that something that you see interplaying with this term, in the way that, again, Westerners, you're a rugby player, you've been in a team sport, but people often think of themselves as a hero just through that subtle way that people have gone through life.
Yeah, and it's interesting you talk about story. I think storytelling has huge. I don't think many people have really looked into the value of it in terms of the research. Something I'm interested in is leveraging storytelling in terms of performance, and how you'll maybe see these Netflix documentaries that have themes throughout the year, and a team buys into it and tells that story and really does it nicely, and how that can elevate performance, because, like you mentioned, it can be quite motivating, and they give a lot of direction to people as well in terms of how they behave and how they should be. So yeah, I think storytelling has huge value, and it definitely links into the values that your company or your yourself hold or your team hold. So I think it definitely has a place, and it would be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah. Well, again, this is a good segue. So obviously you're Dr. Stephen Leckey, a former colleague of mine, personal friend, and would you give everyone listening an overview of who you are and I guess what you did your PhD on?
Yeah, so I am Stephen Leckey. I'm a lecturer in sport and exercise science at the University of Glasgow. My background, I'm originally from Belfast, and played rugby growing up, and got to a relatively good level and never really kicked on, and probably reflected a lot on that, and probably ended up why I took an interest in sports psychology and performance. But I came over to Glasgow, studied, was lucky enough to complete a PhD at Glasgow in mental toughness in Scottish rugby union, which was really interesting, or I thought so anyway, and then ended up in moving into lecturing, and yeah, been there since. Alongside that, work for Athlete Focused, which is the F, you're the F of Athlete Focused, and yes, legacy, and working as a trainee sport and exercise psychologist, so going through my accreditation route. I'm just about to submit my midpoint for that, which has been challenging just with all the other commitments, and looking to really commit more to that over the next few years and make the most of that to turn myself into an effective practitioner, specifically looking at helping athletes perform, helping coaches perform, and helping. My next hope is to help coaches help athletes. So really look at working with coaches to then give them the tools, the skill set, not to become a fully fledged sports psychologist, but certainly to be more informed, more psychologically informed about how they communicate and how they be with athletes to get the best out of them. So,
and
That's me.
Well, I think that's an interesting one. I understand the struggles you've gone through to get to that, become a psychologist, and I wonder whether you just needed to finish a PhD in mental toughness before you then embarked on that other continuing level that seems to be there. But actually, interesting enough, could you tell me about what was the whether it was the moment, the story, in fact, of your rugby playing career to then why you focused on psychology? Because some people might go, I didn't make it as an athlete because I didn't eat very well, or I wasn't strong enough, fast enough. Why the link?
I think for me, like reflecting back on it, I really enjoyed it. I worked really hard. But there probably came a point where I thought that it would be okay. Like what I was doing would be fine and I would still get where I want to be in terms of maybe becoming a professional rugby player. And the example I would give was I basically was in a school program that was great, really enjoyed it, and really pushed us in terms of athletes to be the best we could. That led to sort of provincial and international honours and things, and was in that setup. Then had the decision when I left school to go to Glasgow to study, but very much still focused on playing rugby. But university, first year, pizza, beers, all the rest of it. And there was probably points in that where I knew I was starting to fall away from what I needed to do, but it'll be fine. It'll be okay. I'm good. I'll work hard on the pitch. And it was almost this, well, no matter what I do Monday to Friday, as long as I work my arse off on Saturday, give everything, which I did do, I'll be fine. And certainly at a club level, like that was okay. But I remember going back to a 19s camp and just looking around going, everybody looks different. And they've gone like this and I've gone like that. And then I remember going back later, like another year later, and going, wow, everyone looks different now. So like, you know, you would line us up and you could quite quickly pick out which of these players has been in Glasgow for 2 years. Him, because he looks so like just physically, guys were just so much bigger, stronger, faster, and you couldn't cut it. And I guess it culminated in that realization. And then there was a big tournament coming up where I basically got a phone call to say, you're nowhere near it. You need to buck up your ideas. And that was a light bulb moment. But that was probably 3 months, 4 months out. So I worked so hard, like really, really hard in the gym every day, doing everything I could to get ready. And then tore my hamstring in a warm-up game. And looking back, that is because I tried to condense 2 years of training into 4 months. And that's the lesson is you can't, you know, it's little and often, it's small compounding gains. It's not, you can't make up for stuff by going, you know, I'll give it a big push at the last K, you know, try and win the race. Nah, it's not going to work. You need to put the work in beforehand, and you working really hard and doing that in 4 months, getting into great shape isn't enough to make up for all of the other choices you made for the last 2-3 years. So that was a good lesson for me. And then it started me on this idea of, well, why did I think like that? Why couldn't I be more flexible earlier? And yeah, it led me into that interest.
Yeah, that's cool. That's interesting. And then you mentioned earlier on that there's a shift, or you found a shift in your research from using the term mental toughness to something that was more stable and definable with psychological flexibility. What is that?
So psychological flexibility is all about being present, being in the moment while moving towards your values or actions that are associated with your values. And like, as an example, that can be for me going at the minute, trying to be a healthy person, trying to value being healthy. I work in sport and exercise. And I know the value of health, but for me, psychological flexibility, a really simple example can be like tonight when I go home and I'm tired, I'm just going to have a pizza because I'm tired, and I'm leaning into my thoughts and emotions. I'm letting them guide me instead of trying to be present and understand, well, in this moment, what would a healthy person do? Right, they'd go to the shop, which is a 2-minute walk. It's not a big task. Get some food, come back, cook that, and I'd feel a lot better about that after it. In the short term, yeah, Deliveroo, pizza, fantastic, feel great. And then I finish it and I feel terrible because I've not been that person I want to be. So psychological flexibility allows me or anyone in the moment to make a decision that is associated with their values. So it's not worrying about the future or the past experiences. It's about staying in the moment where, and again, it's called the present for a reason, because a lot of good stuff happens there. And it allows us to make decisions and I guess respond in a way that we want rather than react, than lean into those thoughts and emotions, and actually think about, well, what do I really want in this moment? What really matters to me in this moment, rather than being dragged in a different direction.
I really like how you mentioned being present and trying not to have your history writing your future. Probably through starting this company, I feel like it's been a bit of public therapy, going through my own personal grieving of an athletic career that never really happened and all the decisions that you make off the back of it. But even subtly, the voice in your head that can even I think I probably portray myself as relatively confident, but there's definitely moments when you're like, well, it didn't work out in the past. That time you made a mess of it. And I feel like certainly that can really influence your decisions in the day and perhaps trying to protect yourself as well. What do you think?
Yeah, and like how our inner critic can be really tough to deal with at times. It can be helpful. Like an inner critic is there. That inner critic is telling you, Finley, are you sure you want to spend time in this? Your time's valuable. Like, is this definitely going to work? And sometimes that has been helpful for you potentially. But when you're trying to develop a business, it's not helpful. It's just like, I don't need you right now. It's almost like sometimes within acceptance commitment therapy, which is what drives this psychological flexibility development, like which I'm sure we'll come on to, but it really is about understanding that, you know, that voice on your shoulder isn't helpful. Sometimes it's about understanding, and it talks about it. You can make it like a little funny accent. You can give that inner critic a funny accent. You can make them a little parrot on your shoulder, and it's just, I don't need you right now. Like, I just see right now, I don't need you. What I need is a bit of headspace and a bit of clarity on how I take the business forward. But you can thank it for its concern, you know, but just, you know, I'm doing okay at the minute. I just need to clear the decks a bit and understand how I'm going to move forward. So yeah, I think especially when we've maybe had that inner critic in the past, it can be difficult, and especially if at times that inner critic is right and it then leverages that. Well, I told you that the last time and you didn't listen to me. And when it has a bit of weight behind it, it can be difficult. But it's about listening to it, understanding it, and then it's really how we relate to that thought. Like, it doesn't need to drive us. Just because your inner critic says this didn't work the last time doesn't mean you shouldn't progress and continue to do what you're doing. It just makes it more difficult. So it's how we really relate to that thought and see it for what it is. It's just something that's come up based on our previous experience. And we're not going to try and control that thought and remove it. We're just going to acknowledge it and let it sit. Sometimes we speak about athletes like who have maybe concerns about their performance or anything. Like, take those concerns and put them in your kit bag and take them to training with you. Or those anxieties, like, take them with you. Do what you need to do, but just take them with you. So, you know, as someone developing a business, take all that worry and concern with you on your day.
And how does you'll maybe tell me that it's nature and nurture. You know, I feel like there's perhaps a false binary of putting people in categories of these, you know, type A, you become an accountant, or you do a job that's involved, it's very objective and you just get things done, and perhaps you don't tap into your emotions as much. Conversely, to someone that is on the other side of the spectrum there, that kind of feels feelings and it's creative. You can see these, I realize I'm creating stereotypes here. But how do you think that kind of interplays with it? Because it sounds like it's leaning towards that control type A style personality is beneficial here.
Yeah, I think, again, it comes back to some of the work I've been interested in. It depends a little bit on the situation and the context. So for sometimes you may want to leverage that type A-ness in you and really get your teeth into something and drive through. But there may be other points that you would prefer, maybe a type B, maybe more personal situations. Like, emotions are really important, and some of the work that I've done with a colleague on a text, Ross White, was always helpful in helping me understand emotions, and they're messengers. They're trying to tell you something, and we should listen to them. We don't need to be directed by them. They don't need to always guide us in what we do. So anger, for example, We don't need to use that and let that guide our behavior. But anger is telling us that we care about something. Something's gone wrong that you care about. That could be a relationship. That could be a task that you, or maybe a presentation hasn't gone the way you want, and you're angry and disappointed. Well, that's telling you that you really cared about that, which is a great thing. So I think trying to understand and sit with emotion is important, and not push it away. I'm just really sitting on a fence here between the two, but I think it really depends, because we don't want to push emotion away. It's an important part of our life and can be helpful, and also brings a bit of richness to life. Like, we talk about suppressing emotion, supposedly sort of negative emotion, but it's a bit like holding a beach ball underwater. Like, you can push all you want, you're going to feel that emotion again at some point, no matter how much you wrestle and push and push and push. So we're better just acknowledging it when it shows up, because when we try and suppress emotion, we may also dampen the joy and excitement we feel, especially maybe those type A's. You've had a great success in work and you don't actually enjoy it because it's like, well, I should have this. I should have been successful and should have got that deal across the line, and you don't actually enjoy the richness of that experience because it's, I always think about a golfer. Like, certainly my own I'm not a very good golfer, but when I hit a really good shot, it's like, I don't enjoy it. I almost just see it as, well, that's what I should always be doing. And yeah, I think anytime we try and work with emotion, especially suppressing it, I think it can not only dampen the so-called negative emotions, but it can also hamper us when we try and enjoy things as well. So I get back to your question.
There's this kind of common false friction, like you can't have them together, but you can. Like, you can do things with emotions, and you can push on towards goals that you've got.
Yeah, I think so. I think, yeah, it's definitely like type A, and I would call those sort of, type B, it's quite rigid thinking, whereas psychological flexibility by name is much more flexible. So it's about responding in different situations. You may display a more type A-ness in a certain situation, and you may display a more type B, but whatever is going to be that helpful, facilitated behavior. So yeah, I think it definitely depends, and it's something that you can be flexible with. I think the minute you become rigid and say, I'm a type A and I'm this, I'm that, it doesn't allow you to move and be flexible, pardon me, and be more open as well. Be open to that emotion, like, sitting with it and allowing it to come in. And that's a big part of acceptance commitment therapy, is being open to the emotion and sitting with it and seeing what comes rather than shutting down.
How transferable do you find it? Because I think you're hard pushed to find many or any people in life that are not, there's not some green flourishes of something that they're competent at and they're good at, they like doing. Yet, why can't we why can't we pull that across into other aspects of our life? Or why do we find it difficult? Sorry, I'm asking a cluster question there.
Yeah, I think sometimes because it can be that we associate with certain things, so that can make that transference quite difficult. So, but we should be able to transfer much more easily. Again, being a flexible person, we should be able to understand that, if I'm dealing with a difficult thought in one context and I am able to cope with that, I should be then able to deal with another difficult thought in another context, whether that be a work context or a personal context. When these difficulties arise, which they will, that's part of life. And many people who strive to push themselves experience more difficulty just through the nature of it. You experience more disappointment, more anger, more frustration, more sadness because you're pushing and pushing and pushing. I think but it can be difficult when we try and move that behavior into different contexts. But we should try and see the value of, well, I've done it in this context and I should be able to do it here. Between work and personal. But I do find that people get ingrained and associate them in sort of silos and don't see that crossover.
Yeah, context has a big factor in that, kind of the learned experience, as you mentioned earlier, learned experiences. What's happened when I tried this last time? Why will this time be any different? Yeah,
I think certainly in work, when people get so busy, then they fall maybe back on just persevering. I'm certainly one for that, thinks more is better. And I get rigid with that, like do more work. Whereas in fact, better is better. not more. So maybe I need to think about actually stepping back from that and being more flexible to say, well, maybe I can do less in certain parts of my life and be open to that. Like, do I do less in work so I can free up more personal time?
Yeah.
Like, and would I be willing to be open to that? And that's a question that we can all ask. But I think it is difficult to transfer, I think, but we do have that ability within us if we're promoting this idea of psychological flexibility. That allows us to be flexible in a variety of contexts. However, seeing that in the moment can be difficult because we have those rigid ways of thinking.
Yeah. And just before, the question I was wrestling about asking was, are you able to explain the acceptance commitment? You mentioned it a couple of times, but yeah, give us an understanding of what each of them are. And
yeah, so that's really looked at my final study, my PhD. We wanted to develop mental toughness in rugby players. So we were looking around at different frameworks that we could develop mental toughness, because we got this understanding that there's a cultural element to it, there's a behavioral element to it. It's about what you do, and that can be influenced by the culture that you're in. And as we were sort of looking and investigating this, we looked then into acceptance commitment therapy, or acceptance commitment training. And it's a third wave therapy, and it's really more about this understanding that we can accept the difficult thoughts and emotions that we have. So if we think back to maybe more traditional cognitive behavioral therapies, it's all about changing the thought. So, or, sometimes reframing. So acceptance commitment therapy doesn't have negative thinking. It's just thinking, because you're immediately putting too much weight into what those thoughts are by labeling them as negative. But maybe you go to a CBT therapist and you say, I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. And they will try and stop you having the thought. They will try and change the thought. They will try and basically remove it. Whereas acceptance commitment therapy comes from, yeah, that's completely normal to have that thought. Like, there's nothing wrong with that thought. What is wrong is how we respond to the thought. So having the thought's not the problem. It's how we respond to that thought. So when that's I'm not good enough story or thought comes up, what do you then do? I don't do work. I disengage with friends. I become less social. Okay, that's the problem, not the thought. So it has real, I think, and that was nice in terms of a mental toughness approach, because when you do mentally tough things, you do have these difficult and challenging thoughts, doing a really hard workout. There will be points of that workout where you think, okay, I'll bring my watts down or bring my cadence down, or I'll not do that. I'll take a 20-second rest here. So you've got to push through, and you've got to accept that if you're going to push through, you're going to experience more difficult thoughts and emotions, more physical pain, stress, higher heart rate. And are you willing to do that to move towards that performance or your values? So I think it has, it's a helpful, certainly with mental toughness, that if you're going to be mentally tough, you're going to have to accept that you do difficult things. So that's where we landed on that for that project. And acceptance commitment therapy drives psychological flexibility, and there are 6 processes associated with it. Again, with work that I did with Ross White and Vicky Pemprays and a few others, we basically broke this acceptance commitment into 3 things: being present, being open, and doing what matters. And that's almost like a triangle, a pod of psychological flexibility. And we try and stretch you in each direction to make the triangle whole. Some people are really good at doing what matters, and no doubt maybe listeners are really good at give them something, they get right into it, and they're really good at persevering and sticking with it. But maybe they're not so good at being open, so maybe they're not open to their emotions or their feelings or other aspects of their life, or even being open to not doing stuff. I think always that's an interesting one for people who are highly driven, is trying to encourage them to be a bit more open to do less and see what happens. Just see what happens in your personal life, your well-being, because there are times when you have to come off the pedal a little bit, and knowing that can actually give you long-term and sustainable well-being.
Well, no, I can definitely resonate to the difficulty saying no. I feel like probably my experience of sport is it makes you feel like doing more is always better, which again is fine perhaps when you're in your teens and early 20s when you're trying to explore the world. But after a while, your time starts to run out, and you realize that, I certainly realized that I was not getting as much done as I wanted to, and you were actually being bear witness to, I think, probably a couple of my mental breakdowns and taking on too much, not being able to meet a deadline, and then kind of imploding. at that point. So that on a personal level, that's been something that I've had to teach myself to continually say no, or critique new work that's coming on board that you could say yes to. It sounds cool and exciting because it's at the idea stage, but actually it's going to hold you back from something that's perhaps more important.
Yeah, and that's hard, because if we take it back to that pod example of doing being present, being open, and doing what matters, you're really strong in doing what matters. And sometimes you get fusion, what we call values fusion. You get so fixed on, I'm hardworking, professional, dedicated person, that just pulls you to say yes, 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 and more. And it's almost at points like promoting other values around, whether it be friendships or personal relationships. So values can sit in opposition. Sometimes to be a good husband, wife, partner, we've actually got to promote that value, and the dedicated person value has to take a rest. Someone explained to me values are a bit like a globe. We can shine a light on one, and sometimes that means the others sit in the shade a little bit, and that's okay, because we get to choose what value we promote at what point. But when we're very fused on this hardworking, dedicated person, yes, sometimes you get initial success, but long term, it's just draining. So it's for you in those moments would you be open to saying no? And immediately you're going, well, no, because money, and we've got to get the business and this and yeah. So that makes saying no really difficult. But sometimes it's mentally tough when you're having all these doubts, concerns, and worries. Maybe that's the mentally tough thing, is to say no. No, I can't do this. You're going to have to find somebody else, or, and immediately I'm sure that word makes your heart rate go up a little bit, because you're like, oh, I don't like saying that word. But I think over time, hopefully you've got better at saying it. I've got better at saying it, but there's still work probably to do. And yeah, that's that being open piece and being present and understanding in the moment, rather than going fast forward. Well, what if I don't take the work, and last time this, and no, right now in this moment, what matters to me. And this can take shape all throughout the day. That's quite a big moment. But for me, it's even like spending time with loved ones, and like, how present are you? Am I worrying about work, or am I actually listening to what they're saying? So they're talking to me, and in my head, I'm going, yeah. And like, it's catching myself going, what matters right now? Like, do I really need to think about that stuff, or can it wait? It can wait. And then trying to be present with someone and listen intently and engage with what they're saying. So yeah, there's lots of crossroads that we face during the day, lots of opportunities for psychological flexibility, big and small. And hopefully those are a few examples of how acceptance commitment therapy can be maybe helpful in those moments.
Well, it sounds like when you mentioned being present quite a lot, but then also alongside that mentioned knowing values, knowing who you are. I feel like they're very tightly aligned in the sense of you like a reference point to be present. Like, how do you what do you recommend? I'm trying to think of how do I phrase this question here. For people that perhaps think of values as are skeptical about values, they see them as a corporate necessity that don't really lead to a lot. How would you persuade somebody to invest time in developing their values? And does that lead into helping them be present?
Yeah, great question. I think that's always a challenge, because I think, values sometimes, and again, leaning from what colleagues how colleagues have phrased it previously, but they are sometimes put up on a wall and never referenced. They're just there as wallpaper. And yeah, in the text that we wrote, you can understand them sometimes as adverts. Oh, us as a company, we're about these 3 values. Okay, well, what do you do that suggests that? And there's a pause because they're not clear. So values are adverbs, doing words. They're things you should do on a daily basis. And I think once you're clear with that, it can have huge impact for your performance and well-being. So it's a really good question, because I think people probably know what their values are just through their life, consciously, subconsciously. They probably have a fair idea, but I would really encourage anyone listening to actually spend time sitting. And again, the minute I say spend 15 minutes doing this, some people listening go, it's a waste of time. great. That's a normal thought to have. Do it anyway, right? Do it anyway. That won't work. Doesn't matter. Do it anyway. Try it. And sometimes it's easy to think, well, what if it did work? What if spent 15 minutes considering what my values are really helped? And hopefully that moves them to doing that. And a really simple exercise that I've done with athletes and others is imagine it's a birthday party exercise, and get really into it. Like, imagine that you're at your birthday party, friends are there, fantastic night, everyone's, it's a dinner, drinks, everyone's having a great time, and a loved one gets up to say a speech about you. What would you want them to say? What are the phrases, the terms, the words that you'd want them to use? And spend time thinking about that and really go into that, because that is a roadmap for who you want to be. And wherever possible, try and stay on that road. Yes, I'm not good enough, I'm too busy, I'm tired, I'm angry. We'll try and pull you off that road. And that happens, but how quickly can we then jump back on and move in that direction? So I think that's something that, I find really, really helpful. And something I revisit. I think with psychology, people think, I tried that once. We'll try it every week, maybe spend every month sitting down and going, how are my values evolving? How have I lived them? How have I moved towards them? How have I moved away from them? And spend that time every month and see what it does. It's something that I'm trying to do more of, because I think it's really, really impactful and certainly provides that direction. And to come back to your point about how that links to being present is really about contacting the present moment, but it's also about understanding that our thoughts, we are the context in which our thoughts happen. So what an analogy I can kind of sort of use is, I'll go back to that story, I'm not good enough. When we see that as the truth, that is true. You are not good enough. That's very rigid. And we see that thought as the truth. That is fact. And sometimes our mind can actually provide evidence to the fact and say, well, remember that. You weren't good enough at that. And that's really, really hard. But we need to take a step back. And that's where mindfulness practice can come in handy. We can step back and just see that thought as something that's occurring inside us. It doesn't have any weight. And it's almost like you're standing in a stadium watching a footballer on the pitch. You've got that reviewed view that you can see down rather than you're on the pitch itself. So it's stepping back, seeing that for, that's a thought that I'm noticing. And that provides space. So rather than the thought being on top of us, I'm not good enough, and it's on top of your back, pushing you into the ground, it's actually, you get a bit of space from the thought. And in that space, that's where the value is. What should I do next? I've got that space. I understand that I'm thinking I'm not good enough, but what should I do next? And the great question then is to go, well, what would a hardworking, loving, caring person do?
Mm. Okay, and you mentioned it a couple of times there, but is that real juxtaposition of being somebody that's hardworking, presumably active, doing something, very practiced at doing something, and potentially not very practiced at relaxing. And again, I'm not just saying mindfulness is this being present is relaxing, but not being able to switch off and then take in what's around you. And I think that, and another kind of thought to go with that would be that people in their 30s, it's the time where you get to work. When shit is happening, you perhaps your career is growing, you're trying to do a number of different things, you might be starting a family at the same time. How do you apply this psychological flexibility frequently enough that it'll have a good effect on your life without, again, as you mentioned earlier on, going, oh my God, this is overwhelming. I've now got to do this on top of the eating well, sleeping well, working hard, etc.
Yeah, and it's a really good way. First of all, it's difficult. It's really difficult to get that balance. And I guess there's certainly I take some solace in the fact that we get to choose how we spend our time and energy. And the thing we need to be reminded of that we have that choice. I'm completely in that zone at the minute where in my 30s thinking this is where I make hay, this is where I set up my 40s, my 50s, my 60s, this is where I work hard, and this is where I make difficult choices around weekends and this and that. And that can be quite rigid when I assume or assign whatever's left 6 years of my 30s and say, this is the period where I work really hard. and that sort of drives me. Of course, it's going to lead to some helpful things that might say up my future, but there has to be moments in there where I sit and I acknowledge that maybe I'm being driven, I'm fused on that hardworking nature, or I'm not listening to people around me, or I'm just not maybe connecting with who I want to be. Because yes, hardworking is one, but also being caring and loving and honest and are others. So I think it's great to have those sort of like values do provide that direction, but we need to be really careful moment to moment, and that's where that mindfulness can come in. Is there are opportunities today for you, for me, that we can move towards that loving and caring person. Like sending a message when our mind's going, I don't have time for that, I'm too busy. You do it now. Like we do have opportunities to move towards, but sometimes we get so fixed in this big narrative of work. This is the time, make hay, that we aren't able to step back. And there are definitely moments where you can step away, and you've got to be willing to. That's the key here. You've got to be willing to step away and go, I know this may move me back in this area of my life, and I'm okay with that, because this area of my life is also really, really important. And that's where you get that. That's where the magic happens. Like that's where you get that balance, and you speak to those annoying people that have it all sorted, and you're like, fucking frustrate me, and they're just in that balance, but they still go through all the same things. They've said no to things, and they've overworked at times and not paid attention to loved ones or their health or whatever. So it's definitely a balance. I think it's really difficult. Values can provide that direction, but you have a range of values that don't just include your work life, also your personal life. And it's about, almost an audit each week. How many moves have I made towards hardworking? Great. Tick, 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 tick. How many moves have I made towards being a loving partner? Oh, right. Okay, there's an imbalance here, and we need to then address that balance. So having that weekly audit, catch up with yourself, to say, how balanced am I at the minute? And yes, that will mean saying no to stuff, and immediately can't say no, can't have business, but have all that, experience all that, and say no. That's what happens. See what happens. You'll get it wrong, you'll get it right, but ultimately you'll move towards that more balanced person. So very difficult, but values provide that direction, and mindfulness provides that ability to check in rather than being on the rat race, just being on the wheel, just spinning and mindless. We've all sort of been mindless when I get it sometimes when I'm driving and I'm busy, and I think, how did I actually get here? Like I don't actually realize how I drove here. I was just so focused on something, and I'm not actually. So that mindfulness allows you those moments of presence to say that, almost that check-in with how I'm getting on.
It very much comes across like your values are there to align what you don't do, but also to provide a bit of feedback to self-congratulate yourself when you are doing something, and to start rewarding that you're being the kind of person that you perceive yourself to be in your head. Does that sound fair? Or is it?
Yeah, and we're really bad as human beings, based on sort of evolutionary psychology. We're not good at acknowledging that and feeling that. Like speaking sometimes with athletes and coaches and individuals, we do an exercise, again stolen from Russ Harris, does a great work on acceptance commitment therapy, and The Happiness Trap is a great book if anyone's looking for a good read. So like a values dartboard, and it's a really great exercise to do. You basically have a dartboard, you split it into maybe 4 sections which represent each value, and you can label those. Unlike a traditional dartboard, which I've had sometimes with athletes, treble 20 is not the top score. So it's the middle of the dartboard is the top score. And you basically put an X on the dartboard for each value of, if it's more in the middle, then you've been really aligned with that value. If it's on the edge, then you've not been aligned with that value. And it's amazing when people put an X quite close or in the middle and go, yeah, I've been, I was there this week and I did this and this. And they just see that as, well, that's how I should be. I should always be in the middle. I should be a 10 out of 10 all the time. And that mindset can be quite exhausting, because you don't take the good. You don't feel the good. Like you say, that growth, and, people can be that can be a challenging thing for people to sit with. Like, I've actually done so well over the last couple of weeks. And if you don't feel the good, then it makes that journey quite difficult. because we immediately go to the bad. How can I shift everything into the middle is sometimes the question. How can I get all my points in the middle of the dartboard? That's not the game. Like, that's not the game we're after. It's acknowledging that at times, yeah, that'll be slightly, why was that slightly away from the middle? Oh, because I did this week and this week. And when we can learn from that. But as I've said, it's not realistic to have them all in the middle, because being a loving partner may sit at points in opposition to hardworking within a work context, because you're devoting time to another part of your life. And that's absolutely fine. The key thing is you make that choice, and you make that choice based on a balanced view of your values and what you think's right in the moment. Sometimes you'll get it wrong, sometimes you get it right.
That goes back to context as well. Like, perhaps being mentally tough is feeling happy about yourself, because that's you find that challenging.
That's a really nice way to think about it. Is, yeah, like, are you willing to feel the good? And no, I'm not like that. I'm not a person. Well, I'm asking you to be willing to feel all that. You've had a great couple of weeks. Like, if you can't celebrate now, when else can you celebrate? And I think the narrative is changing a little bit, certainly in sport. Like, you hear of the examples of people winning a cup and they're in the next day thinking about the next season. Yeah, so it's almost like, no, go and enjoy this. Go and enjoy that moment. Don't, again, the value that they're maybe promoting is, yeah, but I'm a dedicated coach. Okay, but are you a dedicated, teammate or person, or, are you going to spend that week now off with your family? Are you a dedicated parent? Are you a dedicated loved one? You're going to look after your partner and, like, go off for a week and enjoy it. Go out for a beer, go out for a coffee, go and enjoy the moment. But they get pulled in by that, no, I'm a hardworking coach, I'm straight in the next day thinking about next season. And that just isn't sustainable, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And also,
you've got to enjoy what you're doing at some point. That kind of compounding misery can build up.
Yeah, and I think obviously that's a really easy example to see the joy in, like winning a cup or achieving a huge goal like that. But we've also got to see the joy in the small things, like, as well, because our mind will immediately go to the sort of perceived negatives much quicker than it will the positives. So that values exercise is helpful to actually acknowledge, what, I've done quite well over the last couple of weeks, and I'm happy with how I'm performing. And it also then provides a roadmap of, maybe this week I'll really promote being a caring person. Like, I'm just going to let that drive me this week. And then next week I can do hardworking, and you sort of, make sure that all your values that you've told me or yourself based on that birthday exercise, like, that's stripping it all back. That exercise strips everything back and says, what matters to you, right? We'll make sure you're doing those 3 or 4 things. And that's where growth, development, and happiness and thriving really sit.
Yeah, I haven't probably been a fly on the wall to people that I would perceive as quite successful. One thing I have noticed is they seem to remind themselves of who they are, where they want to go, and what their values are. It's kind of ever present, whether it's in whiteboards, on their phone, on a spreadsheet, whatnot. And personally, for me, that's been a game changer, because I found that being busy, you forget this. You're just in there. You are almost in flow, but perhaps not a positive flow. You are just doing, and you forget what you're basing your decisions off.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we can confuse action with progress. Like, we think movement and action is always positive, but sometimes not doing certain things, and, like, I've been in that where I've gone down a certain road and quite stubborn, and realized that I probably should have said no to that ages ago and moved in a different direction. And I've been a bit more flexible to that. So yeah, I think we can get confused action with progress and think that more is better and do. And I hopefully people, when they realize and step back and think about their values, and maybe have those 1 or 2 light bulb moments where they go, I've said no to this before, or I've promoted this and spent time with family, or spent time on myself and done a bit less in work, and it's actually had a really positive benefit for me. I think when people have a few of those experiences, then they start to, as you say, I guess, buy in a bit more to the whole approach.
Yeah. And anyone that's training athletically, doing sport, perhaps pushing themselves even outside of sport, will experience setbacks, challenging situations. They might pick up an injury. When they least expect it, perhaps they can post-rationalize it, but What do you recommend someone does when they are dealing with challenging situations, perhaps more specifically ones that feel out of your control? Like how do you cope with that? What strategies have you got?
Yeah, I think that's a difficult one, and again, it will be different. I guess different strokes for different folks in terms of how they cope with those situations. But I think from an acceptance and commitment approach, I think it's firstly moving to that acceptance and feeling the feelings, feel the disappointment, feel the anger, feel the frustration, like sit with it, shed a tear, feel that disappointment rather than almost saying, no, I'm not feeling that. I'm just going to get on with my rehab and I'm going to start this and do this, and almost just sort of putting a bit of a blinker on and not addressing it, because I think that's an important part of coping is that initial understanding of what am I going through here, and let it all come in, like physically let it all come in for a couple of days and speak with people about how disappointed you are and how you're feeling. And then it's okay. I've got to that place where, because I think then acceptance becomes easier because you're not trying to fight anything, like you're not trying to suppress these thoughts and feelings. So then it's really around, if you've just been injured, you've come to that point, you've sat with those emotions, you've felt it. Then I think it's relatively simple, I guess, but comes back to a bit of goal setting. And very much values-based goal setting, or sometimes I use the word like intentions, but how do you intend to cope with this situation? What intentions are you going to set this week that, you've been injured, depending on the injury, the severity, what can you do that is aligned to the person you want to be? And sometimes that's nothing to do with that's no rehab, no nothing. It's just reading a book. Now you've got more time, seeing the opportunities that actually the injury has afforded you to move in other areas of your life, if it's quite a severe injury. But if you can sort of start to that rehab journey early, it's like, what can I do today that's going to move towards that committed athlete that I want to be? Okay, I can do a little bit of this. I can do a little bit of this. I can maybe reach out to the physio and ask some questions. So I think, yeah, trying to get small actions that are aligned to your values is a really key part. And it doesn't always have to be those values that are associated with your athletic identity. You can see it as an opportunity to develop other areas of your life. And again, just depends on the severity and the context. But if it's not a big injury, I think it's very much about, right, what can I do today? What can I do tomorrow? Because that value guided action will allow you to move forward. Which I think is really, really important.
Yeah, and this perhaps might touch on a similar topic, but I know you've spoken about in the past, you've got to do difficult things to get rewards to move yourself forwards. If you were someone that was perhaps thinking in their head and their negative self-talk is, oh, I'm not that mentally tough. When things get challenging, I duck out. But how do they take a step forward? How do they start getting comfortable with being uncomfortable?
Yeah, I think for me, I've done a little bit of thinking around this, and I think for me that's why my own philosophy leans into acceptance commitment therapy, just again from my own experiences of rugby and my background. That, yeah, part of if you want to, for example, achieve a gold medal, you're going to be like, I mean, that's really going to challenge your well-being a lot. And acceptance commitment therapy, I think, is suitable within high performance environments because it acknowledges that. It doesn't try and reduce the stress, because, I always have thought about, if an athlete came to you in 5 years and said, you didn't push me enough. I told you I wanted to achieve a gold medal and you didn't push me enough because you said, oh, if you're feeling this way, don't train today. Or instead it's about, well, everyone else is feeling the same thing. It's about how much can we put around you, your skill set, that we can allow you to cope with what you're going to have to cope with to win a gold medal, which is a lot. So I've always found that interesting. Like if a coach or a sports psych, trying to, especially at the elite end, the issue with that is, no doubt, you've seen that can really lead to abuse and serious issues within environments. So it's such a fine line, but it is a fine line that we've got to go right up to. The way you've put it, first and foremost, I think to achieve anything, certainly within sporting realm and in elite sport, you're definitely going to have to cope with difficulties. Like that's just part and parcel of it. It's part of your experience, and it's how it's not reducing those difficulties for the athlete. It's about preparing the athlete for the difficulties that inevitably will come. So that's my sort of standpoint on it. And obviously you've got to have a line there and be very aware of the environment that you're working in. And then to that athlete who maybe is in that environment, who is having these thoughts, I think it's, again, a difficult one, but it's really just understanding and sitting with them to see, well, changing their relationship with that thought. That they maybe see that thought as like a negative, or that thought then hooks them. We talk about being hooked in acceptance commitment therapy, but they get the thought, I'm not good enough. That literally hooks them like a fish, pulls them in this direction where they disengage with training. They're not happy. They maybe don't, I guess, push themselves because it's like, well, why bother? I'm not good enough anyway. And they sort of get into that mindset, which is not a nice one. So it would be really about sitting with them and understanding, well, where's this thought coming from? Why is the thought showing up? You know, is it based on previous experiences? And trying to move them to the headspace and the understanding that, what does that thought do? What does that thought lead you to do in terms of your behavior? And does it have to? A really simple example for me would be, I'm trying to run very short distances, but
this is not.
Yeah, just getting back. I know we mentioned I'm trying to get back fit again and just get moving, and yeah, it could be like 3K in, and you're like, oh, I can't keep going. Like I can't do this, and I'm only having that thought because I'm on a 3K run. Like that thought, I can't keep this pace, or I want to stop, doesn't actually need to lead to me stopping. I just need to keep putting one foot in front of the other. Like the thought doesn't have to then lead to the behavior. So having the thought I'm not good enough doesn't actually have to lead anywhere, which is, a very easy, oh yeah, sure, that's fine. But when it's deeply ingrained, it's challenging, but it's trying to unpick that for them and change that relationship so they don't see the thought as something that they need to lean into. First of all would be the presence of mind to say, I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. And acknowledging that's normal because I'm doing difficult things and I'm maybe not always going to succeed every single thing I put myself forward for. And then understanding, well, in this moment, what would a hardworking, committed professional athlete do? Okay, they'd engage with training, they'd keep working hard, they'd keep moving forward. So yeah, I think it's a really, really difficult one for athletes, but it's acknowledging first that they're having the thought, because sometimes they have it like 2 years later. Well, I say that's maybe a bit long, but yeah, certainly like, after the session, they're like, oh, all I could think about was how I'm not good enough that whole session. I was like, we can do stuff in the session though. You don't need to wait to the end. It's about having those mindfulness skills to realize I'm having this thought and there's things I can do about it. And often it comes back to acknowledging the thought, being open to that thought in the pursuit of your values. But it takes time, takes practice, like anything. That for me, going through that, I'm not good enough. I'm having the thought I'm not good enough. I'm okay with that because I know it's something that's part of my experience and I'm still going to push on in this moment. That's like a rep in the gym. So if we can do 10, 12 of those a week, then that strength and ability to psychological flexibility, that ability to stay present and move in a value guided direction just comes stronger and quicker, becomes instantaneous. So if we flip all that back to that mentally tough person, you've got those two athletes, both having the same thought, I'm not good enough. One is continuing to engage and push and develop. And on the outside, you say that's really mentally tough, but they're both having the same thought. But one is flexible enough to be able to still move forward while having the thought. So they look mentally tough. So yeah, I guess that links back to that mental toughness piece as well.
And then to flip it round, what do you think mistakes, errors that people are commonly making that could be making them, again, mentally weaker or psychologically less flexible?
Yeah, I think that psychological rigidity is really important and probably something that I could explore more with athletes, but it's really the rules that we have. So And again, maybe considering the rules that they have in their own life for performance. The example that I give is from a sporting context, and again, my rugby background. I spoke with players before, and if they didn't have a good first involvement in the game, so for example, they missed a tackle or they dropped the ball, their line of thinking, rigid line of thinking, would go to, I'm going to have a bad game now. So those, and that was the rule. You've dropped the ball the first minute, may as well just walk off because you're going to have a bad game. It's going to be a bad day. And that's really rigid. That's not flexible to the fact that actually you could drop the ball in the first minute and still be player of the match, and there's plenty of people that have done that. So I think trying to become, and this is where mindfulness is important, become aware of the rules that you put on yourself and put in place. So certain terms was, I must. Anytime you have the word I must, I would always do, well, I can choose to. It's not I must do this, I choose to do it, and I can also choose to do other things. So I think any of that absolutist language that your mind comes up with and tells you, you must do this, I think that's rigid. And it's like challenging that a little bit to say, is this what I actually want to choose to do based on my values? So I think for those that are, that's probably the biggest thing, is trying to understand those rigid thought patterns. And sometimes the prefix to that is I must, or we must, or you must. Any of that absolutist language is something to maybe just sit with and go, hold on a second, do I have to do this right now? And that develops that flexibility, that malleability, I was going to say malleability, but I can't say it. So that flexible, being malleable and being flexible to different things, because it's not just a one-way street that you get caught up in.
And it sounds like without that moment of being present, it's very difficult to do that. I feel like if you're, whether you are sitting in your thoughts or you're sitting writing it down, that you kind of need that moment to start uncovering that language that might be, circulating around you. And if you don't take it, it's going to be very difficult to, I certainly find, our thoughts are fleeting, aren't they? They come in and out, they fly around. It's difficult to structure a sentence in your head. Never mind actually really understand what's going on. So I feel like that kind of the crux of it is that moment of present, of stopping, of slowing down.
Yeah, absolutely. And because those thoughts can hook you really quickly, so that I must do this, and all of a sudden you're half an hour into doing what that thing was, without actually realizing. For me, it's sometimes, again, going back to action is progress. I'll have a to-do list and I'll go to the easy stuff because it's easy, and I'll not maybe deal with the most important tasks that day. So that again can come back to a bit of rigid thinking, and not maybe actually that moment of presence to go, whoa, what do I actually need to do today? What are the three most important things? Rather than, we'll do these three things because they're quick, and that'll mean achievement and success, and I'll feel good about myself. So I think that's a really, really important point. And mindfulness can, you can have formal mindfulness practice apps and things like that. But just trying to sit and be for a minute or two in the morning, just try and sit and spend a bit of time thinking and let everything come in. Don't shut off, like be quite open to everything around you, and just see what happens. Because I think, the challenge is that we get on the train tracks really quickly. When we start our day, and we don't have that moment to stop and think, right, what do I need to achieve today, and what are the most important tasks, whether it be personal or professional. So I think, trying to encourage people to schedule that in, as brief as it is. And again, the more you do, the quicker and better you'll become at understanding yourself and being present and mindful more quickly.
I was actually going to ask one thing to take away, but I feel like that I was going to ask you, what is one thing you take away from the episode if you were to give someone? But I feel like that's it, wasn't it? Really, scheduling in that time.
Yeah, and like even like I've had that in the past where I try and schedule simple things and habits and trying and again, people may be listening, going, okay, I'll do that, and then it comes round to it and they go, oh, I'll do it later. I'll maybe schedule that later on or tomorrow, and almost that's a message to do it now. Like, that's important. You should do that now. And you'll have difficult thoughts and emotions around even scheduling 10 minutes because you're like, I don't have 10 minutes. Will it actually work? Will that thing he's talking about actually work? You'll have that little voice that you had saying, that's not how you should spend your time, do something else. You'll have all that to deal with. And then, the mentally tough or psychologically flexible person will then schedule it in and try and stick to that despite their mind telling them otherwise. And I think from that place, then a lot of the other work can take shape. But yeah, that mindfulness at the start is, and that ability to be present is really, really key.
Cool. Stephen, thank you very much. That was a really insightful conversation. If somebody wanted to find you, not in a non-threatening manner, to seek you out for help, where would they find you?
Yeah, or Athlete Focus website, and you can get my details from there. And I can share my email with you. You've obviously got my email, but if anyone was interested yet, do reach out. I can more than happy to chat about the approach in more detail if they were interested about acceptance commitment therapy and how I have delivered it and do deliver it. Then yeah, more than happy to chat and through that.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephen.